And we are back with another episode of Container Bytes. I know what you're thinking. We did miss last week. I am pulling the war card on that, and we will definitely touch on that today. Hey, Judah, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for having me on. Let's get started with like where it's hot. Straits of Hormuz. We were talking for probably months about Straits of Hormuz closing and what that means. Mostly, we talked a lot about it mostly for oil prices. What are the impacts so far on ocean freight?
Yeah, so as you said, it's a much more important waterway for oil than for containers. Only about 2 to 3% of global volumes normally go through the Strait of Hormuz. But that's not a consolation if you're a shipper on that lane. And, very quickly, new bookings were suspended. That left a lot of containers already on yards where they were, but containers en route. This has been a big disruption. So there's been diversions to other alternate ports in the region, ports in the UAE, kind of on the eastern side of the strait that are still accessible, ports in Oman. Gemini has developed a new route to Saudi Arabia in the northern Red Sea, basically going around the Cape of Good Hope and going all the way into the northern Red Sea without passing by Yemen. So there are alternate routes, and containers will go on by road from there, but certainly disruptions for those shippers. We're also seeing congestion in some of the trades that are, directly trade significantly with the Gulf states, like in India and Bangladesh. So you see containers building up there that are meant to export to those countries. And we're starting to see some increased volumes at some of the Far East transship hubs. Right, so some of those containers that were already in transit to the Gulf need to go elsewhere now, and some of those are going to be stored at kind of transship hubs like in Sri Lanka and Singapore, and that could start to impact non-Gulf shippers as well if congestion really builds up there. But so far it doesn't look like it's too bad, and again, bookings have been suspended, so operationally at least it's really kind of limited to directly to those lanes for now.
Yeah, and that was exactly what was kind of going through my head of like, when do we start seeing the spillover? We saw this a lot, during COVID, where congestion in one place would start to trickle down. If we look at the hard numbers on the ocean freight side, what has this meant for container rates?
Yeah, so for container rates on the main lanes, we saw rates go up by a couple $100 per FEU last week, which is about in line with seasonal trends, right? So we're just after Lunar New Year. There's generally some increased demand for a couple weeks. So I really don't think that rate increases on the main trades are reflective of anything going on with Iran. We saw very steep surcharges for those containers en route to the Gulf, like thousands of dollars per container, disruption surcharges, also charges to offload at other ports, like $800 per container for some from some of the carriers. But again, for the most part, those price increases for now have been limited to those directly impacted containers and not for the broader market. Just in the last couple of days, though, we started to see carriers announcing surcharges for other lanes. So also for containers going to the Middle East, but not exactly to the Gulf states, but even for Asia, Europe, on some carriers are announcing surcharges or GRIs coming. So these aren't in place yet, but they'll be coming in the next few weeks and really significant. So this is really kind of what we're starting to see a knock-on effect in terms of rates. We're also seeing reports of pushback. So there are reports that government agencies, both in India and in China, are meeting with carriers to try and see that rates don't go up too high. Especially, and we think this is certainly relevant for other lanes that are really not directly connected. So we'll have to see what happens there.
What is which specific surcharge? I'm always kind of impressed with the creativity around the naming. Uh, is this a war risk surcharge or Middle East falling apart
Uh, there,
surcharge?
there's a range. There's a range of names. Sometimes they're just calling them peak season surcharges, but it's usually emergency disruption surcharges or emergency contingency surcharge or things like that. So there's no shortage of names. No.
And obviously, um, oil costs are spiking, and that'll play a direct impact right into fuel prices. So how do you see that spilling out into freight costs?
Yeah, so we talk about surcharges for other lanes, which there's been some pushback, and they're questionable of what the disruptions really are in terms of impacting those non-Gulf lanes. But certainly the price of oil is a major component of carrier costs. So you're seeing fuel costs go up for them. They're going to pass those on to shippers. So we're already seeing announcements of emergency fuel surcharges from multiple carriers, CMA, CGM, Hapag-Lloyd. They both announced them for about $150 per 20-foot container, so about $300 per container for long haul voyages. This is starting March 23rd. They're not allowed to introduce emergency fuel surcharges immediately. Some are only announcing surcharges for certain lanes. Maersk is also announcing across all long haul lanes of $400 per container starting March 25th. So these are coming in the next couple weeks. Carriers generally increase fuel charges on a quarterly basis. So we might see a series of emergency surcharges, and that would be put into place in a few months for Q3, since Q2 is already set. But that's something that I think will definitely go through if the war stretches on, if the price of oil stays elevated. This is something that will increase freight rates, as opposed to these other surcharges where there may be some pushback, and doesn't mean they won't go through, but they may be less amenable to accepting them from the shipper side.
And this is all hitting at a time when freight rates typically would be going down, right? Entering the lull between post Lunar New Year and peak season.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's also one piece of it, is that because this is happening during a lower demand period, we could expect the disruptions to be less impactful for the broader market, because there's just going to be fewer volumes than if we were in a more higher demand period.
Right. And I mean, moving on to the air side, right? The Gulf is a major hub for East-West air cargo. Emirates, Qatar operating from there, and of course, a lot of airspace closures going on. What is happening operationally on the air cargo side?
Yeah, so we're approaching, over the weekend will be 2 weeks since the outbreak of the war. And as we know, these countries in the Gulf have been targeted by missile and drone attacks. And the airports specifically have been targeted, as have some of the ocean ports. At least Jebel Ali had a fire from something that fell there. So the airspace was really completely closed. Very few flights were going out initially. And as you said, Emirates and Qatar are two of the three largest cargo carriers in the market. Together, they're more than 10% of overall capacity, so it's been really significant. Over the last few days, though, in the UAE, they've opened kind of safe air corridors, and they're sending like almost 50 flights an hour are leaving the airport. And Emirates has a long list of destinations that now they're flying to. They're not flying their full number of flights. They're probably above 50% of their normal flights, but it's coming back online, and we're seeing reports of improving situations in terms of getting capacity. Etihad has started flying too. They're not as significant a player. They're not in the top 20. Qatar still remains closed. So in Qatar, the airspace is still completely closed. So that is still a significant kind of drain on capacity. At the same time, we see other carriers increasing long haul capacity, right? So if a lot of Asia, Europe goods was going through the Gulf normally, now we're seeing more capacity going directly from Asia to Europe. So so we're kind of seeing adjustments there, and it was much more disruptive initially than what we're seeing in the last couple of days.
And then I guess in terms of the two questions we talked about before, like what about again the price of rising fuel, and how is the air market being affected in terms of rates?
Yeah, so for sure, fuel costs will be a factor for air carriers as well. While the capacity was really constrained, we did see air rates start to increase really significantly. We saw rates surge about 50% from South Asia to Europe and also to North America. Those rates are up to $4 and $6 per kilo, respectively. We saw a 20% increase from Southeast Asia to Europe, which went above $4 per kilo. These prices seem to be kind of slowing or leveling off and not coming down, and that might reflect some of this capacity being put back into the market. But again, kind of what we're talking about in ocean, some of the biggest markets that are impacted are South Asia or Southeast Asia, especially India and places like that. A lot of their goods heading west by air would go through Dubai often, and so this is a big hit to them, meaning increased costs because they have to go through China or go through airports in Hong Kong or things like that. So it's increased costs, and we're seeing rates increase as well. But as we said, it seems to be trending towards improvement as some of the Gulf carriers are restoring their schedules.
Of course, in the backdrop, there's the ongoing trade war that we've been talking about that has been taking up most of the energy until now. What is new there? Does the U.S. administration still have time to be focusing on tariffs, or is it all in on the current war?
Seems like there's still time, and there's new developments there as well. So, as we know, the Supreme Court ruled that IEEPA tariffs were invalid. They ruled back in February 20th. Just this past week, though, we had the U.S. Court of International Trade that ruled or kind of ordered that the government has to start refunding IEPA tariffs that are already paid. And there was some speculation that this would take a lot of time till there was a decision. There have been, thousands of lawsuits filed, and it's kind of been consolidated into just one. So even if you're a business that hasn't filed a lawsuit, it seems that you'll be eligible to get a refund anyway, which is a big win for importers. Customs and Border Protection said they can't do that right away. They don't have the means to do that. To do it manually would take would take lifetimes. So they have to develop automated ways of doing this, and say they are trying to do that within the next 45 days. So it's a big step forward, but it doesn't mean that refunds are like immediately on the way. At the same time, we have these Section 122 tariffs that have a 10% global tariff in place. And just this week, the USTR said that Section 301 investigations, and this is the law, the part of the trade law that allows country-specific tariffs, those are underway, and they're going to be ready by the end of July, meaning that they're going to use these other more kind of labor-intensive to pass those, to meet the criteria to put those into place, which is why they used IEPA in the first place. They're saying these will be ready in time for July to basically replace the IEPA tariffs. But Section 122 is also now being challenged by about 20 states, because 122 is based on a balance of payments, and it was really, the law was put into place when the U.S. was still on the gold standard. So there's questions about the basis for the use of that in the meantime as well, which means, if shippers are paying tariffs on 122, maybe those will be refunded later on as well. Yeah, so still a lot going on there.
Wow. Wow. All right. And I mean, this is likely good news for historical cash flow for small businesses. Have you seen any changes kind of looking forward or right now for US imports? Like, have we started to see bumps at least? Or is it, or maybe it's just getting lost inside of the Lunar New Year comeback?
Right. So have been in the Lunar New Year period, so it's not really possible to get goods out. Now we're just post, so we'll see what happens. If we look at National Retail Federation, they do projections for U.S. ocean imports, and they just came out with projections this week. If you compare those to their projections in February, which was before the Supreme Court decision, they're about the same.
Mm-hmm.
So at least based on that measure, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a lot of front loading, even though at 10%, it is quite a reduction for a lot of for imports from quite a few countries, including China. The baseline was 20%. And the administration has said there's going to be another Section 122 putting 15% tariffs, which is the roof, the ceiling for what Section 122 can be used for countries that had tariffs at 15% or higher. And China was at 20%. So that's a 10% percentage points different if you're importing from China. But so far, it seems like there's just enough uncertainty and enough kind of caution by shippers that this isn't triggering some of the front loading like we saw last year.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll see how this evolves. Judah, thank you very much.